Hello, advanced students. You guys have kind of taken a back seat the last couple of weeks, and I apologize for that, but let's get you caught up. This is the makeup lecture when I was out on the 10th because I was sick, and we've been talking about getting this web backend thing working for quite a while now, so why don't we get that going? So let's reacquaint ourselves. We built some of this already. We went to pythonanywhere.com and we set up an account, and this is pretty much what you get when you log in. Naturally, it will have your name there rather than mine. And when we go into this, let's review what we built. So we're building this really simple web backend using Python, and I picked Python because it's really easy to set things up for the kind of thing that we're about to do. Basically, we're making a web API, or application programmer interface. And it's really easy to make web APIs in Python, especially if we use this micro framework that I like so much called Flask. Really, though, you could make it in anything. And we tried to make one in .NET, and it turned out that the lab computers and the classroom computers were not configured for web projects, which is a mystery. Nevertheless, they are not, and so we couldn't show it in class. That would have been another fine example. I did show you a quick overview of what it would look like in .NET, and .NET projects have a lot of stuff in them. And so that's probably not the best place to start if this is your first ever web project, since many of you are game design or game programming students. You probably don't have a lot of web experience, and so I was afraid to throw you into the deep end, so to speak, with a large web project of the type spit out by Visual Studio. Another great option would have been to use PHP and a piece of software called WAMP, which is a web server with Apache, MySQL, and PHP all built into a nice little package that would have probably been Plan C. And maybe we'll expand our tutorials in the future to include that, but those would have been fine. You basically you can use anything that you want to do this. You can use Java, you can use C#, you can use... We're using Python, you could use PHP. Another one that's really popular these days is Node.js, and a lot of people are looking to make things in Node.js, but they all do the same thing. They all essentially create a web server style environment where you can serve web requests, and we're doing that in this example. So here we are with our Python Anywhere console, and our site really doesn't have very much to it. So let's go look at it. First of all, let's go into the My Site folder. And there's a template folder there. Really, everything comes down to 2 or 3 files. This is the one we want to look at first. This is our http tutorial.py file. So we created this, and we typed all of this in, and we typed most of it in. You had an assignment to type the rest of it in, I believe. And so this is what we should have wound up with. And I will put the final version of this out so you can get to it, but let's review what's in here. So this is pretty much the entire application in this one pretty small file. It seems long because I have commented like nobody's business in here, so probably at least a third, which is probably a good benchmark, a third of the lines in here are comments or just documentation that don't have anything to do with the actual application. Okay, so this is what creates a Flask project. So we've got these import statements at the top. We have an application object created from Flask, and then the rest of this is just application routes. And what an application route does is it maps a function, in this case our hello world function, with a URL or universal resource locator map. And a URL is basically just what you type up here in the browser address. So that's what that's called. You may not have known that was called a URL. You probably did, but that's what it is. And so you have this URL, and in this case our URL is pythonanywhere.com. So that's the base URL. And then what comes after that? Well, various things can come after that. Now in this case, we've set up a web application. Python Anywhere is the application that we're using. The application of our actual app is something else. So let's go review where that is. If I go back up, I can find this tab that says Web on it. And when I click Web, this is everything about the web application that I've created. So mine says brucevanhorn2.pythonanywhere.com. Yours will say whatever it is you set up your username as. And it's probably not a terrible idea to go ahead and click this reload button if you haven't done anything with your application in a little while, which I have not. And we can see that we have an expiration date here. Since this is a free project, it's not going to give us a free website indefinitely. It will eventually reclaim the resources that are allocated to it, which is fine for our use. If you wanted to do a commercial API for your games or whatever project you happen to be working on, you can actually pay them a little bit of money, say $5 a month, and they will keep something up perpetually for you. And they'll even give you a better URL than .pythonanywhere.com. You can map whatever you'd like to it. But that's all well outside the scope of this course. We just want to learn how to make a back-end API for our Unity games. So we've got this, it's loaded up, it's ready to go. Let's review where it is. It says right here where it is, and that's our URL. So let's right-click this and select Open Link in New Tab. And it will open it up. I actually had one already there. And you can see that it says Hello Thunderducks. Well, let's go back and look at that mapping file that we were at just a moment ago. Let's go back into Files, and let's go into My Site, and let's go into httptutorial.py, and let's review how this works. So as mentioned, this is our route. So this is just the default route. This is the URL with nothing else on it. You can see here's my URL. There's nothing else on it after the end. And I'm getting back Hello Thunderducks, which is the output of our hello world function. So that's pretty much expected. We made this other one where we have /first on it, and it will come back and say this was your first web function. So if I come back over, put a /first in front of that URL, or I should say at the end, it will print out this was your first web function, which is exactly what we have here. And it's just at this point outputting plain text. The thing to remember here is that pretty much everything, unless you're downloading a file like an image or a zip file, everything that comes back on the web pretty much is plain text anyway. So HTML on a web page, that's plain text. It's just marked up in a certain way using the HTML markup language. Everything is plain text. We're going to use plain text to send data to and from our web application. And that's how this whole thing works. All right, so the other thing that we did, and this is kind of fun in Flask, is it allows you to easily make HTML templates. It's got a templating engine built into it called Jinja 2, and it allows you to do templates really, really easily. Now, we're not doing a course on Jinja 2 or Flask, but it's definitely worth your time if you want to invest that and learn how to do web development. We just wanted a quick page where we could go test some of the functions in our little web application here. Specifically, we wanted to be able to test the registration part of it. So there's two parts of this. There's registration and there's a login. And essentially what these are doing is they're accessing a text file. So login, let me find it. Here it is. Here it is right there. Login will actually check to see if an email and password combination are already in our text file. And we're using a text file again because we want to keep our tutorial succinct. In reality, you would probably use a database of some sort, either a relational database like MySQL or maybe one of the newer NoSQL databases like MongoDB. Both of those are very popular strategies and well suited for storing large amounts of information. For our purposes, a text file will suffice because I don't have to teach you that much code to get you off and running. And so let's review what's happening here. So when you log in, we're going to create this Boolean variable called authenticated and set it to false. Now remember, in Python, you don't need to declare the type. You just have to go ahead and set it to some sort of variable where it can figure it out. So in many ways, it's a lot like C#'s little syntactical sugar where you can put the var keyword on there and it figures out what the type is based on how it's used. It is a strongly typed language, but that's how it works. It works based off of the assignment. Here we have a test string combination, and essentially what we're doing on this URL is we're passing in an email and a password right there on the URL. So we're going to call login / whatever the user's email address is / whatever the user's password is. And this is, of course, being sent in the clear, as we say in web development speak. You would want to not do this in the real world unless you had a secure socket certificate, an SSL certificate. And again, that's getting on to web development, but that's a cautionary tale. You would definitely put up some sort of security in front of this so that people who are inspecting this traffic would not be able to see the email and the password coming across on the normal URL stream, at least not without a good fight. So you'd want to get an SSL certificate for this, but again, this is fine for our learning purposes. I just want you to learn how to make the API. All right, so we're just passing the email and the password right there on the URL, and this is going to respond to an HTTP GET request. So this specifies what kind of request it allows. And if you do something that's not in this set of braces here, essentially this is a array. If it's not in there, then it's not going to do it. So if you tried to post to this URL, you would get a 405 error, not allowed. That's an HTTP status code, and it would tell you that you're not allowed to do that. All right, so we'll try this out here in just a minute, but let's finish going through what it does. So we've got this authenticated set to false. We have this test string that we build based on the URL, and we go ahead and create an empty string variable. If we find something in our registration file, then we're going to go ahead and assign the results to this, and then later on we'll return whatever the contents of this is, or some variant of it. Down here on line 29 is where we're actually going to do the work on our text file. And again, we're just using a text file, one record per line. And this just essentially opens that text file called registrations.txt. And then it goes through line by line, and it tries to find a match with our test string, which we constructed up here on line 24. If it finds a match, then it breaks out of the loop and then comes down here and does the rest of the authentication logic. All right, so let's go see what that is. So if you come down here to line 40, it says if authenticated, and that would be set. Remember, we created it on 23 and set it to false. If we find a match, we set it to true on line 35, and we go ahead and we get the line from the text file that it matched. So we come down here and we say if authenticated, and we're essentially just going to split this string up based on the pipe character. So it probably makes sense at this point for me to show you what this file looks like. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to switch back over. I think I'm going to do this in a new tab so that I can just come right back to this code. I'm going to switch over here and find that registrations file. I happen to have one. If you've never run the app before, you might not have one, but let me show you what it looks like. So I have this test file here that says Bill test, or it says Gates test Bill Gates, and then some number. That would be some sort of registration code or whatever that we sort of made up. The takeaway from this, I'm not even sure if this is in the right format. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. I'm not even sure if this is in the right order, but the thing that I want to show you is that our data are separated by this pipe character. If you look on your keyboard, it's right above your enter key. If you shift the backslash, some keyboards show it like some funny looking colon, but it is in fact a line, an up and down vertical line, and we call that the pipe key. All right, so what this does, let's go back to our code and see how it's used. We're doing a string.split on this. Essentially what this does is it splits this into an array based on wherever it finds that pipe character. So if we go back and look at this, what we should expect is an array of strings where the first thing, the element at position 0 is going to be Gates, the element at position 1 is going to be test, the element at position 2 is going to be Bill, 3 is Gates, 4 is our registration number. And that's how this works. So let's go back and look at it again. We're splitting based on this, and then we're putting that into something called result. And then after that, we're going to turn that into something that's a little more useful to us in C#, and frankly, it's useful to almost any programming language out there. It's called a JSON string. JSON stands for Java Serialized Object Notation, or JSON for short. And essentially what this is a universal way of representing objects. Any language, anywhere can pretty much use a JSON string somehow. And C# can do it, Python can do it, JavaScript can do it. All of the languages that we talk about in our class can do it. Most other languages can too, especially those that are oriented towards the web. And this has really taken off as sort of the lingua franca between all applications. It used to be XML. XML is a bit cumbersome. It requires a parser. It requires a lot of memory and resources. It turns out that JSON is just a lot easier for everyone to work with, so most people use JSON instead of XML. All right, so this is what a JSON string actually looks like, and all we're doing is we're taking the values that we split out into that array, and we're putting them into this JSON format. So a JSON string looks like this. It's got these curly braces around it, as you would expect out of an object. It's just like an object literal in C#. And then we've got the name, the field name, in this case is email, and then we're going to use email, and that's already been passed in up here on line 21, as you recall, in line 22. We're passing in email and password, and so we really don't need to parse those out of the file because they're already in there. Next we have first name, which is at position 2, last name, which is at position 3 in our array, and registration code, which is the last thing. And in Python we have this really neat syntax where instead of it being 4, which I suspect is what it was, let me go look. It was the last one, so it would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. I could have done 4 there, but I thought it would be more interesting to show you that we can go backwards from the end. And so -1 gets us the last thing on the array. All right, so this leaves us with a string that essentially looks like this, except where the variables are appearing here, they're filled in with the values of those variables, and that's what gets returned. And then after that, we convert it into a proper JSON string, which is really just exactly what we've talked about. It's not doing any grand conversion here. Often when you're doing programming in Python, you are actually converting Python objects into JSON. This is just a string and it's already in JSON format, so it doesn't really have to work that hard. And it will return that. Now, if it doesn't find a match, we're going to come through and look at this again from the standpoint of it doesn't find a match. Authenticated is false. We build our test string. Registration is empty. We walk through our loop, but we don't find anything. So we get down here to the bottom. Nothing has triggered this part on 34 and 35, where we actually set the contents of that registration line to anything other than an empty string, and we never set authenticated to true. And so it's going to hit this if statement at line 40 and say, oh, it's not true. Got to come down to the else statement down here. And at this stage, we're just going to throw an HTTP error. In this case, we're going to throw unauthorized. And so we're going to get this error code back. So that may or may not work with Unity now that I think about it, but we will figure it out. And if it doesn't work, then we can always return a string that says unauthorized. I think if I were writing a generic API, I would want the ability to inspect the HTTP error code. And I'm assuming we can do that, though as I say this, I may be assuming incorrectly. But we will adapt and overcome because that's what we do. All right, so we've got all this in place. We can do this login thing. Let's go look at the register part. So the register part is the same thing in reverse. It's taking all of these elements and writing them to the text file. So if you're going to write something, we're going to use a post for that, an HTTP post. Getting retrieves information, post will save information. It's used for creating new records. Okay, so posts always come off of forms. A form is an HTML form. I'm sure you've seen one before. You signed up for Python Anywhere, and when you did that, you filled out a form with your name and your email address and all of your vital information on it. And so I know you've seen a form before, otherwise you wouldn't have made it this far. We've done the same thing, though we aren't using HTML. We're going to create a form in Unity, and we're going to take the information that the user types in and post that. So to do that, you just have to retrieve what's on the form. So when we do this post, there's a form that's implicit, and the form will have fields, and those fields will have names on them. And in this case, we're going to have a field name first name, we're going to have a field name last name, email, password, and registration number. So all of that's great. That's a form that's coming across. What happens after the post? We're just going to come down and open our text file again. And we really probably should check first to see if it's already there, but this is supposed to be sort of a minimal first application. And so we're not doing that. We're not checking to make sure that it's already there or not already there. We're just going to put it in there. So we're going to open it up, and notice this A here. This means append. So if the text file is there, then it will open it up and append to the end of it. If the text file is not there, then it will create it, open it up, and append to the end. If you remember up here, it looks like there, whoops, wrong one. There was a blank line there. That's exactly what happened. So it opened it up and it appended a new line, but there wasn't one there already. That new line is not going to hurt us as it's going through trying to match. It's obviously not going to match because it doesn't have anything on it. And so it's fine. I don't feel the need to go back and spend time to get rid of that blank line. All right, going back to this, it's opening it up as append, and it's assigning it to a variable registration file. Down here, we're just going to create a new line, which is this is just simple text concatenation. We're taking OS line sep email. Oh, this is actually what gives us that new line character up there at the top. So we didn't append anything. When we appended this, it appended the new line character. And remember, this will be different depending on what operating system you're on. We are used to working on Windows, where the new line character is CRLF, or carriage return line feed. But on Linux, which is what this system's actually running on, this Python Anywhere instance, the new line character isn't CRLF. I think it's just LF. Anyway, they're different, and that's something that you see often in software development. And I know you've seen it in our class, because every now and then Visual Studio will say, hey, your line endings are wrong. Let me fix them for you. And you'll click OK and just go about your business. All right, so let's go back over here and see what we've got. Okay, so that's what OS line sep does. It gives you a new line. And then we're just going to add email, separate it with a pipe, password, separate it with a pipe, first name, last name, registration number. We're just concatenating this string together, and then using the variable that we created on line 77, registrations file, we are adding a new line, which is what we created here on line 79. And so that's all there is to it, that we've just written another line to that text file. Because we use with, it's just like using in C#, where it goes ahead and it'll close the file for you automatically and deal with garbage collection. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And then when it's done, it's just going to return some text that says OK. We could probably make it a little more bulletproof. We could put some error codes in there in case anything goes wrong. If you tried to use this in production, I suspect something would go wrong pretty quickly, because you would pretty quickly run into, once you get a user load on there, you'd run into file locking problems. There'd be too many processes trying to read and write to the file at the same time. So this is a good explanatory example, but it's not a very good production example. Again, you'd want to use a database for that. Okay, so that's essentially what this file does. It is about as simple as a web application can get. The other thing that we made when we built this was a simple test harness for the registration portion. So we have this register thing. Again, we're doing the post, and we're posting it to /register. And we put that into a template. Now, it's not really a template because we didn't do anything with the templating engine, but it's under templates. And there's this register test HTML thing. And so all this is just HTML in here. There's nothing special about it. There's no Jinja 2 markup in here at all. We just basically made a simple form that we can use to test this. So that's great. And if I go back and look at HTTP tutorial again, since it's in that templates folder, let me find it. It's probably, would have thought it was at the bottom. There it is. On line 17, test registration, it says return render template, and it gives the name of that file. So register test HTML, Because it is in the templates folder, which is a special folder in a Flask application where it expects to find those HTML templates, you can just say render template and then give it the name, and it works just fine. So let's give that a try. Let's go to one of our open ones. Here we go. You want yours, not the Python Anywhere one. And let's add to the end of this test register. It looks like I've done this before. Let me go back and look though, because it obviously didn't work. It's looking for /test. So I'll just copy that. I'll paste it onto the end of this one. And there's our test form. Like I said, nothing extravagant here. But let's put something in besides Bill Gates. Perfect, and then we'll click push to test, and it should save it, and there's our OK text that we remember from our code. And now I should be able to come over here, and it's not going to update this for you, so let me close this. And I'll go back to my site, and let me look at this again. And there's what I just added. So as I suspected, line 2 is probably in the wrong format, but that's okay. There were some bugs in the initial version of this, which I've fixed. And that was probably one of them. So there's your email address, there's your password. So when we authenticate, we're really just looking for that string right there. We're taking the email address that you supply, your password, we're sticking a pipe in the middle of it, and when you go do the login part, that's all it's doing. It's just taking email, pipe, password, and it's looking for any string that starts with that little combination. And so that's what it should look like. And any string that starts with bvanhorn@dcc, however many C's there are, .edu, at password, or excuse me, pipe and then password, any string that starts with that is going to pass. So again, not the most bulletproof, production-ready example, but it's good enough for our purposes. All right, so that's great. So I should now also be able to check this out. If I look at my login URL, here it is. So it's login, email, password. And so I should be able to make this work as well. Let me pull this down. Whoops. And I want to be able to go look at this at the same time. So let me just line these up so that I can see my URL. There it is. All right, so it wants login, and then I typed bvanhorn@dcccd.edu, and / my password is password like that, and it worked. I get back my data. So this is my JSON response registration code. Now they may or may not be in order. It doesn't matter if they're out of order, because we're not, earlier we did a string split on that text file, but this is an actual object when it comes back. So when C# gets a hold of it, it's going to basically just be a class, as though you created a class with a field called first name, last name, email, and registration code, and you'll be able to use your usual dot syntax to get the results out of the object. Okay, so at this stage, we pretty much proved that the Python application itself is working. Now all we have to do is create the Unity front end that accesses this.